A warm, balmy Sunday afternoon, written and read by Bill Lenihan. The ground seemed to shimmer in the bright sunlight. The rhythmic buzz of insects broke the silence. It was as if everything living was resting in the warmth of the sun. The crops had been harvested. Soon it would be autumn. Sunday was always a special day for me and my sisters. It was a day we go to the chapel, and today was extra special. It was Harvest Festival, where everything would be laid out and thanks given to God. It was particularly special to my mother, as after the service parcels of food were given to the poorest families, and we were particularly poor, so we usually had the largest parcel. Sunday was also a break from the drudgery that was now my life. The oldest of 7 children, my mother depended on me. I was acting as a mother to my 4 younger sisters. My mother spent most of her time looking after the twins. Twin boys, 2 weeks old. She said she didn't even know she was expecting. After having 5 girls, you'd have thought my father would have been pleased to finally have boys. But that was expecting too much. More bloody mouths to feed was all he said before going to the inn, which was what he did most nights. My father was a farm labourer, a big man that was known to throw his weight about. We lived in a tied cottage that consisted of a living room and 2 bedrooms. There were better cottages on the estate, but there was always the newcomers who got those. My mother said it was due to my father's drinking. Only reason we still had a cottage at all, she said, was because of us children. The manager of the estate taking pity on us, but his patience was running out. I wish she hadn't told me. There were lots of things I wish she hadn't told me. But I suppose she needed someone to tell. If it weren't me, who could it be? I watched as my mother and the children headed home to the cottage. They were excited at having a food parcel. My father, as usual, was not around. He'd be off drinking somewhere, which was the way he spent his Sundays. I needed some time on my own, so I walked up to the winding path to the top of the valley. I always felt that this was the same spot where God looked over the valley. I was leaning on the 3-bar gate. I never tired of the view. I watched the river meander on the valley floor. I felt at peace, lost in thought. I didn't hear someone approach. Suddenly I was grabbed from behind. An arm was wrapped around me, trapped in my arms. As I struggled to move, the grip grew tighter, so tight I could hardly breathe. I thought I would pass out. I could feel a hand being pushed up my dress, frantically pulling at my underwear. I felt his breath on my neck, smelled the acrid stench of stale ale. I could hear my clothes tear. I felt tears run down my cheeks as I was lifted up against the top bar. I could feel the pain. He was banging against me. I felt him shudder and groan. Suddenly I was released from his grip. My legs would not support me as I fell to the ground. I lay there in the sun, my face now burned with shame of what had just happened. He walked away without saying a word. I watched my father walk down the winding path until he was out of sight. Not once did he look back. I couldn't move. I felt sick. I couldn't stop myself from crying. The pain would go away, but the shame would never leave me. How long I lay there I didn't know. When I arrived home, it was dark. My clothes were torn and covered in dust. I felt weak. My mother looked at me. She just looked at me, not saying a word. I wanted to speak, tell her what had happened. Why did I have this feeling? The feeling of I could not explain. She knew. I knew she knew. My life had been turned to one of shame and fear. He would come into the bedroom and rape me. His calloused hands would be all over me, touching me. The stench of his stale breath would fill the room as he grunted like an animal. I used to try and hold my breath so I didn't have to breathe the vileness that came from his body, but I couldn't. I had to breathe, and then I would feel sick. He cared little that my little sisters slept in the same bed. They were his daughters. I could only feel disgust at myself, not at him. He was beneath disgust. I suppose it was inevitable that I'd eventually become with child. At 14, I was to become a mother. The winter was upon us, and I would walk to the banks of the river. It would be flowing fast, but I never had the courage. Did I intend to do it? I wasn't sure. I wasn't afraid of dying. Perhaps dying would be better. I could see nothing before me, but I would have the baby to think of when it arrived. I was now heavy and being ignored in the village, as if it were my fault. I wanted to cry out, but who would listen? I stopped going to chapel. Well, I was asked not to attend. The minister said that such as things were, perhaps it would be better for the faithful if I did not attend. It was at this time he stopped visiting. Then one night I woke to see him standing in the doorway. He was staring at my sister. He saw me and closed the door. I realised it would soon be my sister. I hardly slept, fearing he would do to my sister what he had done to me. I prayed to God that he would spare her and that he would wait till the baby was born. I was now soiled. Please God, don't let him soil her. But my prayers went unheard. His sudden noise awoke me. The moon was full, lit the room. He was leaning over my sister, trying to pull the bedclothes away from her as she desperately clung to them. I could see the terror on her face. He was making animal sounds, like a pig grunting. The room stank of stale ale. In the moonlight I saw the bulging eyes, filled with lust. I quickly rose from the side of the bed. So engrossed in his lust was he did not hear me. I'd now started taking a knife to bed. I could feel it in my hand. Standing over him, I grabbed his hair and jerked his head back, pressing a knife against his throat. I said, "Let her go, or I'll cut your throat." I saw a smile cross his face. "Kill your father, would you?" he said, through gritted teeth. "You wouldn't dare." Forcing the knife into his throat, I felt the blood start to run over my hand as it dripped onto the bed. "If you don't let her go, I'll finish you," I said. It was my voice, but I didn't recognise it. It was hard, cold. Was it me? He let go of her, holding his neck without looking at me. He rushed from the room. The baby was born. It was a healthy boy. The birth was good. Well, that's what the midwife said. But she never had children, so she could never know the pain I felt. The emotional pain was the hardest to bear. I no longer feared being raped by him, if it meant my sister would be safe. But I would see him watching her, see the evil lust in his eyes. I wished it was me he lusted, so she would be safe. But I knew one day soon he would have her. And my other sisters, what of them? I was powerless. I could do nothing to stop him. The baby was now 3 months old. Everyone was busy bringing in the harvest. I was told by my mother to take a basket of food to my father, who was working at the steam engine that was being used to thrash the corn. I refused. "I'll not take food to feed that pig," I said. I saw the fear in her face. She started to cry. It was the first time in many years that I saw my mother show emotion. "Please, please take it," she said. I'm afraid. Please take it." I couldn't find it in me to say no. I had to take the food to this man who had made his family's life a life of fear and misery. I wrapped my baby in a shawl and picked up the basket. I'd not left the baby out of my sight since the day it had been born. The thought that he wouldn't even look at him, for the baby to look into the eyes of a baby should not see so evil. He saw me walking towards him. He shouted something, but the noise from the steam engine and the rattle of the thrasher was all the sound I could hear. There was no one nearby. They'd all gone to load another cart for the thrasher. He just looked at me, lifted his leather apron, and fumbled with the buttons on his pants. He stood there in front of me and the baby and peed. I could see him laughing. I knew he was drunk. He was drunk most days. He staggered slightly and turned to his side. Pulling a flagon from a satchel, he drank deeply before turning his back on me. He was trying to put the cork back in the flagon and place it in the satchel. He was bent over. I could see the belt that wound around the big wheel of the steam engine and the thrasher. He was stooping down in front of it. I placed the baby on the grass, walked up behind him, and with one push he fell forward into the belt. He didn't even have time to cry out as he was dragged into the big wheel. I turned, picked up the baby and the basket and walked away. He was buried 3 days later. Almost no one attended the funeral.